Hello, and thank you to the Renal Patient Support Group and Shahid for inviting me to come and speak for World Kidney Day 2021. I'll be talking about the organ donation opt-out laws in the UK. And my name is Fiona Loud, and I'm Policy Director for Kidney Care UK. We were formerly known as the British Kidney Patient Association, been around since the 1970s. And I am myself somebody who has had an organ donation, a living donation from my husband 14 years ago after spending 5 years on dialysis. And I'm Policy Director for the charity. So for World Kidney Day this year, we're asking everybody to talk about the big topic which we think people are ignoring, and that's kidneys. And we'll be talking this week, and hopefully all year long, of course, about kidneys, about kidney transplants, and about kidney health. And if you need to know more about that, go on to worldkidneyday.co.uk to get that big yellow kidney. And you can probably see I'm wearing yellow as well for this talk, just to keep in the theme of it. So I'm talking about, as I say, about the changes in the organ donation law in our country. So I've gone back a few years to 2015, to the date that the organ donation opt-out law was introduced in Wales. So this was 2 years after it had been announced. So why would we need to change the law in the first place? Fundamentally, we have far more people who are waiting for an organ than it is possible to give kidneys or hearts or lungs to. And people die still every day for want of that life-giving transplant. So changing the law such that people are presumed to be donors should they die in a situation where they could be, where people in general will say we are happy to donate but will never perhaps get around to putting their name on an organ donor register, will then change things over time to more people being able to receive that transplant. So back to Wales in 2015, that's the date the law changed there. And that's what it looked like. That was the Human Transplantation Act from 2013. And it set out how consent was to be given in Wales. And I've explained a little bit here about what happened in Wales because it will apply or is applying in the other countries that have moved or are moving to opt out now. So there are a few choices that people have. One is to give express consent. That is to make a decision to opt in to donate some of your organs. The other is to say, I don't wish to donate, that is to opt out. And there's another choice that not many people use, but it's absolutely available to people, which is to nominate a representative to make a decision about donation on your own behalf after you've gone. The Act does not require anybody to record their decision about organ donation. It's completely up to you. But if you've not taken a deliberate step of recording that you don't want to be, or you do want to be a donor after death, then you would be regarded as having no objection. The family, as I'll be saying, will always be involved because they will always be asked if they know of any reason why you may or may not have wished to become a donor. And it's always worth saying that there's far, far less chance of anybody ever becoming a donor than there is of somebody needing a transplant. So who does this apply to? Well, it applies to anybody over the age of 18 who've lived in the country for 12 calendar months and are there in a voluntary capacity, that is, they're not a prisoner, and who haven't recorded or expressed a decision. So it's not for visitors, it's not for children, and it's not for people who lack capacity to make consent. And that's just a little run through of some of those things there where family can be involved as well. But one other thing there you can see with the hand is that presumed consent applies to the commonly donated organs. So not novel transplants, things like hands or face or something which would require an explicit consent and discussion with the family. So how does it work then? So what are the checks that somebody would go through? Should somebody be dying in a situation where they could perhaps become a donor? So that's kind of, if you register on the organ donor register, you can say you do want to be a donor, you don't want to be a donor, or you make that decision to express somebody else, to represent somebody else, or you leave it to an opt-out system. And if you're not in the opt-out system, if you haven't chosen to opt out because you're not on the organ donor register, then a range of checks will be made with family members or close friends, if there are no family members, to see whether somebody has made a decision. Now, this change, at the time, this is what they said, it's considered to be a lever for a cultural shift in behaviour and attitudes for changing or increasing consent across the whole of the UK, to clarify somebody's organ donation decision and to encourage people to share that with those closest to them. And indeed, it was that change. There was an impact evaluation, it was late 2017, which looked at the numbers, looked at background figures and the impact of the new law. And that research is linked there. It was done by Bangor University. And in 2019, Vaughan Gething, the Health Minister in Wales, announced the highest overall consent rate in the UK. In Wales, the numbers of donors are quite low, so overall, because it's not being such a large country. So if you would expect 15 extra donors and you had 10 one year and 20 another year, you might see quite a variation in consent rates. But overall, the publicity, the thinking that it caused people to do, all came together and have slowly but surely increased consent to donation in that country. And considerations for the whole of the UK. It did increase awareness. There was a lot of discussion about all of this, and it was a potential to help people to make those decisions. So just very briefly to look at the at that time, the sort of international donation rates, and it was felt, and I think this data shows that as well, that of the countries where opt-out is the law, there is in general a much higher donation rate, with some exceptions there, one being the US. But Spain, as we all know, and Belgium and Portugal are the higher countries. And actually, I think it's very fair to say that the opt-out isn't the only thing. It's the conversation, it's the promotion, and it's the whole public awareness that pulls together to increase donation. So it's not one thing, it's part of a rack of things. Now, by 2017, the mood music was definitely changing in England, and the political leaders started to speak out about how organ donation should change to opt-out in England as well. Alongside this, and of course I'm telling the story as somebody from one charity and from our own experience as well, but we ran about 4 or 5 organ donation week events in Parliament with NHS Blood and Transplant, and we brought patients along to that, and that meant a lot of MPs and policymakers meeting and hearing from patients about what organ donation meant to them, and at the same time everybody who contributed their stories to the press, to all sorts of charities and so forth. They all played a part in starting to change the mood around organ donation. And you can see here that all 3 political parties all spoke up at their party conferences to say that they were in favour of organ donation opt-out. And so it happened that in 2017, a private member's bill got drawn from a ballot, which was the Organ Donation Deemed Consent Bill. Geoffrey Robinson MP brought that forward, and because the government decided, although was a Labour MP, because it had cross-party support, the government gave its support to it, and very unusually for a private member's bill, it started to progress through Parliament. And you can see a little bit of the timeline there. Here's the parliamentary process. It takes 3 years, so that was, I think I've just spoken about early 2018, and it did indeed take up to 3 years for that to happen. So right from that decision to legislate, for that private member's bill to come through, to receive cross-party support, then for the legislation to be prepared, to be developed, to be consulted on, and to go through all the parliamentary stages. and eventually to reach royal assent and implementation. And amazingly, that's what happened with this. It happened in Wales, as we know. It happened in England. It's almost completed in Scotland, and there's something happening in Northern Ireland too, which I'll talk about later on. The consultation. It's very important to hear from people through all of these systems what people think are the public in favour. And there's a lot of questions that were asked there. And there were a lot of responses, and it was considered that faith was so very important that actually there is if you register now for organ donation, you have a faith question on there as well, which says, if I want, I can include my faith leader in part of the discussions with my family after my death. So there was a lot of campaigning along the way. I showed you that timeline there. This is from 2018 when we had a Facebook Live session with the then Secretary of State for Health, Jeremy Hunt MP, and that's a SNODA specialist nurse, Sam Newman, in the middle there with me, which was all very exciting. Alongside that, there were parliamentary readings, first and second reading in the House of Commons, first and second reading in the House of Lords, committee stages, and I attended, I think, every single one of those, apart from perhaps the very first one at the beginning of 2018. I attended every single one of the readings, went to every single one of the committees, wrote to all the MPs on every single one of those committees, and wrote to a number of lordships as well, and met with some of them to discuss what it was, why it was so important from a patient point of view that this law was able to come through. So a lot of letter writing, and that was alongside the events I've mentioned in Parliament. And of course, there was the most enormous amount of work going on with everybody. The Daily Mirror supported this, and Max, who many of you will be familiar with because this law is nicknamed Max and Kira's law, was the young boy who had heart failure, who was able to receive Kira Ball's heart, and to make the case for changing the law. And so royal assent was reached in February 2019, which was amazing and very, very exciting. And once you've reached royal assent, it's a matter of time until implementation happens. It's usually about a year or so later, and it means that lots of details, legal details, and the training for staff is all done during that time. Now, of course, something else happened, and as we know, the pandemic struck in March 2020. But nevertheless, Max's law, as we've said, was implemented May 20th, 2020. And there's a nice video there which we can have a look at from the new Secretary of State for Health, or newer, and that's Matt Hancock, thanking all the patients for all the work we've done, and us at Kidney Care UK for the support for this law. You could say it's a very difficult time to change the law in the middle of a pandemic, and indeed it is. But if that had waited, it would have been years before it had changed. So the law was changed. Training had to happen later, and so we won't be able to see the full impact of that for some time for fairly obvious reasons. However, there was a little bit of a review done 6 months later, and there have been some donations under the new opt-out law, and people, just to kind of re-emphasise that 80% of people in England say they support organ donation in principle, but most of them don't get around to doing it. So having that conversation with your family member will always make it easier, whatever the law. And 8 out of 10 people waiting for a transplant are waiting for a kidney. So I've just put up there the organ donation stats from this week, and the main thing you'll be able to see, unfortunately and very sadly, is that all the numbers are down, down, down. Organ donation, transplantation virtually stopped twice over the last year, so we're running at between 20–40% lower donation rate than previously. And one of the things we always said around this, the change in law, was that it's the right thing to do, but not the only thing to do. So public education, and you may have noticed the new Leave Them Certain campaign that's just got going to remind people that the law has changed and what it means, so the timing has had to change to now rather than a year ago for that to happen, and that the right capacity was needed, and we do need to rebuild our capacity in the whole NHS because people are tired, and the pandemic has really shown where the system needs far more capacity for everybody, including organ donation. So there's much more to do, and it has been made more difficult everywhere by the pandemic. But nevertheless, we are in a situation where, things are changing, and there is a restart going to come this year with the onset of vaccination. So in Scotland, the law is changing later this month to an opt-out system. And in Northern Ireland, last summer, the Health Minister, Robin Swan, met with Kidney Care UK, and that's Joanne Dobson and Andrew Cromwell, my colleagues there. I was on Zoom, and he said that he was minded to change the law towards an opt-out in Northern Ireland as well, which again seems to have cross-party support. So they've just completed a consultation in Northern Ireland with an encouraging number of responses there, and we're awaiting the outcome of that towards, with any luck, a change in Northern Ireland too. So as a four-nation comparison around the different numbers, and you'll still see that Wales is the better of the group, but more work to do. So I'd like to summarise now my talk and remind you, as the kidneys matter every day, not just World Kidney Day. The average wait for a kidney is 3 years. 5 people a week will still die waiting for a transplant. Family will always play a part in any decision for donation. Knowing your loved one's wishes makes it easier. Staff are now trained and are ready to implement, but they are tired, so a little bit of time is going to be needed more. Engaging with local communities to understand their concerns, the questions they want to have answered, is always going to be important through any change. Transplants are now happening again. And finally, just to say, at the charity we have an open consultation at the moment, an open survey at the moment about getting your own voice heard through COVID-19, and there's the link there. It would be great if any or all of you could go on there and tell us about your experiences just before the system restarts. So I wish you all well, keep safe, and thank you very much.